She didn't look like someone you'd call ma'am twice. That was the thing about Lorraine Beckett. She had the kind of face that people looked past, not at. 43 years old, medium height, the sort of build that disappears into a crowd the way water disappears into sand. She wore a gray cardigan that morning, the kind with small pills forming along the sleeves from too many washes, dark slacks, and flat shoes that made no sound on marble floors. Her hair was pulled back, not styled. Her bag was canvas, not leather. She carried a folder under one arm and a paper cup of coffee in the other hand, and she walked through the revolving doors of the Hargrove Federal Courthouse at 8:47 in the morning like she had done it 1,000 times, because she had. She had done it exactly 1,012 times. The two officers standing just inside the entrance didn't know that. They didn't know anything about Lorraine Beckett except what they saw. A black woman in a gray cardigan who didn't look like she belonged in a federal courthouse. Not to them. Not on a Tuesday morning when the building was already buzzing with the kind of controlled chaos that precedes a high-profile sentencing. Officer Dale Pruitt noticed her first. He was 26, 3 years on the job, and carried himself with the particular confidence of someone who had never once been wrong in his own estimation. His partner, Officer Bev Kowalski, was older and quieter, and she noticed Pruitt noticing the woman and felt, somewhere in the back of her throat, the first small stone of dread. "Excuse me." Pruitt stepped forward. Not a question. A wall. Lorraine slowed but did not stop completely. She had a hearing at 9:15 and she did not intend to be late for it. "I'm going to need to see your ID and your reason for being in this building, ma'am." She looked at him then. Really looked at him. The way you look at a math problem you already know the answer to. She shifted the folder under her arm, set her coffee cup on the edge of the security table, and reached into her canvas bag. "Building pass," she said, and held it out. Pruitt took it. He studied it the way people study things they've already decided are wrong. His eyes moved from the card to her face and back again. The photograph matched. The name read L. Beckett. The designation read Federal Judiciary. He handed it back. "And what's your business today?" Lorraine took the pass. She took her coffee. "I work here," she said. "Right." He said it the way people say, "Sure you do. But I'm going to need you to wait over there while I verify." She looked at the chair he was pointing to. A plastic chair near the wall. The kind saved for people being processed, not people who belonged. She looked at the clock above the security desk. 8:49. She had a sentencing hearing in 26 minutes. She had reviewed the pre-sentence report twice. She had notes. "That won't be necessary," she said, and stepped around him. What happened in the next 4 seconds would be reviewed on camera footage 11 times by the Office of the Inspector General. Pruitt moved fast. He put a hand on her arm, not a gentle hand, and said, loudly enough that 3 people in the lobby turned to look, "Ma'am, I said wait." Lorraine stopped. She looked at the hand on her arm. She did not raise her voice. She did not flinch. She said very quietly, "Take your hand off me." He didn't. What he did instead was signal to Kowalski, who closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. 1 second of what might have been prayer, before she moved to Lorraine's other side, and together the two officers walked Lorraine Beckett, federal district judge, toward the exit of her own courthouse. The lobby was not empty. There were attorneys waiting for the elevators. There was a court reporter eating a granola bar near the information desk. There was Marcus, the security supervisor, who had worked in this building for 19 years and knew Judge Beckett by name and by sight, and who was, at that exact moment, on the phone with his wife about their daughter's school pickup, and whose brain took a full 3 seconds to register what his eyes were seeing before he dropped the call without saying goodbye and started walking fast. But they had already pushed through the side door before Marcus could reach them. Outside, the morning air was still cool, the kind of cool that means the heat hasn't decided to commit yet. The concrete steps of the Hargrove Federal Courthouse were wide and white, and they caught the early light. There were people moving along the sidewalk, a food truck, a woman with a stroller, a man in a suit checking his phone. None of them knew what they were watching. Pruitt had his hand on Lorraine's elbow, not guiding, controlling. "You're going to need to come with us to verify your identification before you're permitted back in the building," he said. Lorraine said nothing. She was counting. It was a habit she had built over 20 years. Count what you can control when you cannot control anything else. She counted the steps down from the door. 7. She counted the cars parked along the curb, 11 in her line of sight. She counted the seconds between now and when this would be corrected. She had been counting since she was 8 years old, and understood for the first time that the world would require her to wait in chairs that other people didn't have to sit in. "I'm going to need you to sit here," Pruitt said, gesturing to the low concrete barrier at the edge of the steps. "I will not," Lorraine said. "Ma'am, my name," she said with the particular precision of a woman who has spent 20 years making sure every word she says in a courtroom lands exactly where she intends it, "is not ma'am. I have told you who I am. I have shown you my credentials, and you have placed your hands on me twice without cause." Pruitt's jaw tightened. He was young enough to confuse authority with volume. "You were failing to comply with a lawful order." "What order?" Her voice was absolutely even. "You ordered me to wait in a chair. I am a federal employee on federal property. I asked you the legal basis for your request and you didn't provide one. That's not a lawful order, that's an assumption." Kowalski said nothing. She was looking at a point approximately 6 inches above Lorraine's head, and her expression had gone the careful, deliberate blank of someone who has already decided she will be resigning by end of week. The side door opened. Marcus came through it at a pace that was not quite running, but was as close to running as a man in dress shoes can manage. Behind him was Patricia Dunn, the court clerk, 58 years old, 22 years of service, the kind of woman who keeps the entire building running on the strength of institutional memory and sheer personal will. Behind Patricia was a man in a dark suit whose name was Raymond Cho, and Raymond Cho was the Chief Deputy U.S. Marshal for the district, and his face, as he came through the door and saw what was happening on the steps of his courthouse, underwent a transformation that people who were there would describe differently later, but all agreed involved the color draining out of it completely. Pruitt saw them coming. He didn't understand what he was seeing yet. Marcus stopped 2 feet from him and said, "Officer, stop, right now." "Sir, this individual was failing too." "That," Marcus said, and his voice was shaking slightly, not from uncertainty but from the effort of staying professional in the face of something that made him want to do the opposite, "is Judge Lorraine Beckett. She is the sitting federal district judge for the Eastern Division. This is her courthouse." The word "her" landed in a specific way. Pruitt's hand dropped from Lorraine's elbow. The silence on those steps lasted maybe 4 seconds. It felt much longer. The food truck on the corner was playing something low and vaguely Latin. The woman with the stroller had stopped moving and was watching with her hand shading her eyes. The man in the suit had put his phone away. Patricia Dunn stepped forward then. Patricia, who had served under 4 judges in this building and had a memory like a court transcript and a spine like courthouse marble, stepped forward and looked at Pruitt in a way that could not be mistaken for anything other than what it was. "All rise," she said. She didn't say it loudly. She didn't need to. She said it the way it gets said inside, in the courtroom, when the door opens and the moment has come, not as a performance but as a fact. And because it was a fact, it had weight. Pruitt blinked. Raymond Cho had already moved to Lorraine's other side, not to guide her but to stand with her, which is a different thing entirely. "Judge Beckett," he said, "I apologize for this, deeply and completely." Lorraine looked at him. Then she looked at Pruitt. Then she picked up her coffee cup from where she had set it on the concrete barrier, took a sip, and said, "I have a hearing at 9:15. "Yes, ma'am," Raymond said. "Your Honor," Patricia said gently, because this was the correct form of address, and Patricia Dunn was never imprecise about these things. "Your Honor," Raymond said. Lorraine looked at Pruitt one more time. He was standing very still, the particular stillness of someone who has just understood something they cannot undo. "When this hearing concludes," she said, "I'll expect a full incident report on my desk. Names, times, footage, all of it." She paused. "Do you understand?" Pruitt said. "Yes, ma'am." She didn't correct him this time. She turned and walked back up the 7 steps and through the side door of her courthouse, and Patricia Dunn held the door, and Marcus held his breath, and Raymond Cho pulled out his radio and began what would become a very long morning of phone calls. What happened inside the courthouse that day is a matter of public record, though the record doesn't capture everything. At 9:15, the doors of Courtroom 4B opened, and the bailiff said the words that open every session, the same words said every morning in courtrooms across this country. Words so familiar they can slide past you if you're not paying attention. But in courtroom 4B that morning, the attorneys who had been summoned for the sentencing of a man named Victor Talley were paying very close attention, because word travels fast in a courthouse, and by 9 o'clock the lobby story had made it to every break room, every elevator bay, every clerk's office in the building. So when Judge Lorraine Beckett came through the door in her robe, the robe that had been hanging on the hook in her chambers since 7:45 that morning, waiting for her, and took her place on the bench, the room was not just quiet. It was the particular quiet of people who are recalibrating. Victor Talley's attorney, a man named Scott Aldridge, who had practiced federal criminal law for 18 years and had appeared in this courtroom 17 times, looked at the bench and then looked at his legal pad and then looked at the bench again. He was not a man given to visible emotion, but his hands, which were resting flat on the table, pressed down slightly, the way hands do when a person is steadying themselves. The prosecutor, a woman named Diana Reyes, had her pen uncapped and her notepad open, and she was sitting very straight. She had been an AUSA for 11 years. She had appeared before Judge Beckett 9 times. She knew what Judge Beckett's presence in that room meant for the quality of the proceeding that was about to happen, and she felt, sitting very straight in her chair, something she would later identify as relief. Lorraine settled into her chair. She set her folder on the bench. She looked at the room. Attorneys, defendant, gallery, court reporter, bailiff, the American flag in the corner, the seal on the wall behind her, the windows that let in the morning light. She had looked at this room from this angle 1,012 times. She never stopped seeing it. She picked up her pen. "Good morning," she said. "We're here today for the sentencing of Victor Talley, case number 24CR00041. Before we begin, I want to note for the record that there was an incident this morning in the building that may be the subject of separate proceedings. That matter will be handled appropriately and through proper channels. It will not affect these proceedings." She paused. "Mr. Talley, please rise." Victor Talley rose. He was 41 years old. He had pleaded guilty 8 weeks ago to federal wire fraud, 17 counts, after a scheme that had taken money from 312 people who could not afford to lose it. Some of them were in the gallery. Lorraine had read their impact statements. She had read all of them, twice, the way she read everything, completely, and with the understanding that words on paper represent real weight in real lives. The sentencing took 2 hours and 40 minutes. When it was done, Victor Talley was remanded into custody. His attorney shook Diana Reyes's hand. The gallery dispersed slowly, the way galleries do when the outcome has been both expected and still somehow needed to be witnessed in person before it was fully real. Lorraine gathered her notes. She stood. The bailiff said the closing words. Everyone rose. She walked back to her chambers and took off her robe and hung it on the hook where it always hung, and she sat at her desk and she looked at the window for a moment. And then she opened her laptop and began drafting the incident report. She had promised herself she would write before the end of the day. The inquiry into what happened on the steps of the Hargrove Federal Courthouse on the morning of June 17th was opened by the Office of the Inspector General within 48 hours. The security footage, there were 4 cameras with angles on the lobby and 3 covering the exterior steps, was pulled the same day. Dale Pruitt was placed on administrative leave while the investigation was pending. This is standard procedure. It does not mean anything by itself. Procedure is procedure. But here is what the investigation found, in the language of the final report, which became public record 6 weeks later. Officer Pruitt had stopped 7 individuals in the lobby of the Hargrove Federal Courthouse in the 6 months prior to the incident. 6 of the 7 were black. None of the 7 had been found to have any legitimate reason for being stopped. All 7 had valid reason to be in the building. The one individual who was not black, a white man in his 60s who had presented himself at the information desk with an expired visitor pass, had been directed politely to the renewal window. The report used the word pattern 4 times. Dale Pruitt's attorney issued a statement about training and good faith effort and the difficulty of security work in federal buildings. The statement was 340 words long. It used the phrase "no discriminatory intent" twice. Bev Kowalski did resign, as she had decided she would. She submitted her resignation the day after the incident and did not appeal it. In the letter she gave to the chief deputy marshal, she wrote one sentence about why. "I knew it was wrong and I didn't stop it." That sentence was 7 words long and more honest than anything in Pruitt's attorney's statement. There is a question that lives underneath all of this, and it is not a comfortable one, and it doesn't have a clean answer, but it deserves to be asked out loud. What if Lorraine Beckett had not been a judge? What if she had been exactly what Dale Pruitt assumed she was? A woman who didn't belong in that building, by his calculation, because of the cardigan and the canvas bag and the color of her skin. What would have happened then? Would the stop have been wrong? Would the hand on the arm have been wrong? Would walking her out of a federal building for the crime of existing in it while black have been wrong? Yes. The answer is yes, and it doesn't change based on who she turned out to be. This is what the comment from the building's longest-serving security employee, a man named Gerald Ossie, who had been there 19 years and who was interviewed as part of the OIG investigation, came down to. Gerald sat across from the investigator and folded his hands and said, "The problem isn't that he didn't know she was a judge. The problem is that it would have been wrong either way. You don't treat people like that. You check the ID, you check the pass, you ask the question, and then you step aside. That's the job. That's the whole job." That is also, it turns out, the whole point. Lorraine Beckett did not speak publicly about the incident. She gave a brief statement through the court's Public Information Office. 3 sentences, factual, measured. She noted that proper procedures had not been followed. She noted that the matter was under investigation. She expressed confidence in the process. She did not perform her anger. She did not explain herself. She did not need to. People who knew her said this was characteristic. Her clerks. She had 2 law clerks that year, a young man from Georgia named Davis and a young woman from Chicago named Amara, said she came into the office the next morning at the same time she always came in, with the same paper cup of coffee, and sat down at her desk and began working. Davis said she seemed, if anything, quieter than usual. Amara said she seemed exactly the same. "She's not quiet," Amara said when someone asked her about it later. "She's precise. There's a difference." Lorraine had been precise her whole life, out of necessity. She had grown up in a family that did not have the luxury of imprecision. She had put herself through undergraduate school on academic merit and 2 part-time jobs. She had put herself through law school on a scholarship she had written 3 draft applications for before submitting the 4th. She had clerked for a federal appellate judge who told her in her first week that she would need to be twice as good as the other clerks to be taken half as seriously. And she had looked at him and said, calmly, that she already knew that and had already planned for it. She had made partner at 34. She had been appointed to the federal bench at 41. She had, at no point in those 43 years, had the option of being imprecise. The cardigan was real. The canvas bag was real. The flat shoes were real. She owned beautiful things. She had a closet that people who visited her home often quietly marveled at. But she had learned a long time ago that beauty in how you dress can be mistaken, in certain rooms, for effort to belong. And she had never been interested in signaling that she was trying to belong. She had always simply belonged. That was the thing Dale Pruitt had not understood and perhaps never would. That belonging doesn't announce itself. It just is. A building pass that says Federal Judiciary, a folder of notes, a paper cup of coffee, 7 steps up to a door that has always been yours. 6 weeks after the incident, when the OIG report was released and Pruitt's employment status moved from administrative leave to termination, Lorraine was in her chambers preparing for a motion hearing. Her clerk Davis knocked and came in and set a copy of the report on her desk without saying anything, because he had worked with her long enough to know that she did not need commentary, just information. She read it in 20 minutes. She set it down. She looked at the window. Then she picked up her pen and went back to her notes. The robe is still on the hook in her chambers. It is there every morning when she arrives and every evening when she leaves. It has been dry cleaned 47 times. It is starting to show the particular softness of a garment that has been worn often and cared for consistently. The way things do when they have been a part of someone's daily life for long enough. Lorraine Beckett puts it on every morning before she takes the bench. She takes it off every evening before she goes home. She does not think about it as a symbol. She thinks about it as part of what she does, The way a surgeon thinks about scrubbing in, or a pilot thinks about the pre-flight checklist. It is the work. The work is the point. If you made it to the end of this story, I want to ask you something. Was it enough that justice came because of who she was? Or does it bother you, even a little, that the outcome might have been different if she had been anyone else? Because it bothers me. The procedure should have been the protection, the ID check, the pass, the basic presumption of innocence. That should have been the floor for everyone who walked through that door, regardless of what they were wearing, regardless of what they looked like, regardless of what Dale Pruitt decided in the first 3 seconds of seeing them. Gerald Ossie said it best. You check the ID, you check the pass, you ask the question, then you step aside. That's not policy, that's decency. Lorraine Beckett didn't need anyone to step aside for her because of her title. She needed someone to step aside for her because she was a person with a valid building pass on a Tuesday morning, and that should have been enough. It should always be enough. If this story made you think, share it with someone. If it made you angry, good. That's the right response. And if you want more stories like this one, stories about people who are underestimated, dismissed, and then impossible to ignore, subscribe to Velvet Reckoning. We'll be here every Tuesday. All rise.